So let's transition into those other two teams, John. We talked about the sort of the old guard, right? It's funny to talk about Notre Dame and Texas as not part of the old guard, but we're referring to old guard in regard to looking at the last decade. Who are the teams that are just every year seem to be in that competition for a top recruiting class? Alabama and Ohio State have proven that. Two other teams trying to show that they belong in that conversation. That's Notre Dame and Texas. Let's start off with the Longhorns, John, because I think the obviously getting Arch Manning was huge for Texas, but they had a window right after his commitment to say, let's make our run. And boy, did they ever.
Yeah, I think they had 8 verbal commitments, and he became number 9. Texas is now up to 22 in the class of 2023, and a lot of those guys have flat out said it. Even prospects who weren't considering Texas, and they're not committed. Like Damon Wilson, we talked about earlier, he flat out said, after Arch Manning committed to Texas, I called up Texas, and now 2 months later, Texas is in his final 5. Look, total underdog and probably not going to win, but that literally got the Longhorns back in the conversation. They stopped recruiting it. I mean, it was unbelievable. But anyway, the Arch Manning effect resonated about as well as anybody could have predicted. A lot of offensive firepower has jumped on board. Number 1 running back Cedric Baxter, top 3 or 4 receiver Jonte Cook has jumped on board. A bevy of offensive linemen, I think 5 offensive linemen jumped on board. And then they're also now able to dip into Louisiana a little bit more because it's Arch Manning, it's New Orleans. So you get, Derek Williams, one of the top 2 or 3 safeties in the country. You were in it for Jordan Matthews. There's some flip buzz there after his commitment to Tennessee. So now the defense is starting to benefit from the Arch Manning situation. So yeah, it's a total galvanizing moment for Texas. Totally took advantage of it. But now, again, the season is here. So right. you won the offseason. I don't think there's any doubt that Texas was the offseason recruiting winner in the sport. I mean,
John, I want to point this out to you, John, to back up your point. Arch Manning committed to Texas on June 23rd. That was their 9th commitment. By July 4th, which is less than 2 weeks later,
right?
They had landed 10 more kids. They landed more kids in the week and a half to 2 weeks after Arch committed than they had landed up to that point in time when Arch committed. That was, and like you said, it was a quality pickups. And that just really, like you said, that changed the complete. You expect Bama's run to come. Texas making that run and beating Bama and Georgia to do it. That's the other part of this, John, because in order to get these top-ranked classes, this is what people have to understand. In order to beat Bama in the rankings, you have to beat Bama on the trail. To beat Georgia and Ohio State in the rankings, you have to beat them on the trail. And Texas did that with Arch, and then that allowed them to do that with some other kids because of Arch. And it was really an outstanding run. But as you said, now they've got to go show that the program is trending in the right direction.
Yeah, and perhaps fittingly, Alabama's coming to town September 10th, and that will be, by all indication, a humbling time for Steve Sarkisian and company. But can you contend? Can you compete in that game? Can you flash with Quinn Ewers and company with who knows how many recruits? I mean, you talk about early season big games. How many kids will be at UT when Alabama comes to town? That will be as star-studded a recruiting event as there is relative to one game this year. Again, Ohio State, Notre Dame, probably
those are the two.
The other clear kind of like number 1 candidate in their own right. But that's part of it too. What does the atmosphere look like? What do those kids feel like? Do you go into that locker room after the game, Steve Sarkisian, presumably taking an L on the field, and do you feel emotionally like, hey, we're getting there, like we're heading in the right direction? And can that be translated and visible to all the fans, the recruits, mom and dad, the parents, the high school coaches, the mentors, the 7-on-7 coaches, the illegal street agents, everyone in between? Do they kind of say, oh, this is different. This is different for Texas. This isn't Sam Ehlinger saying we're back after a mediocre bowl win. This is a legitimate, okay, Texas has a chance here. If it feels like that on September 10th into the morning, I should say, of the 11th, then all of a sudden you feel a lot better about the chances of Texas finishing number 1. Because if it's the opposite, and if it's oh my God, this was a great offseason run, but long way to go, UT. And all of a sudden you're losing Big 12 games and you can't get over the Kansas hump. Oklahoma, even, with a retooled coaching staff, takes you down again. If it starts to feel like that, you could see the wheels falling off because you're recruiting high-level players. And that's what you said earlier. The quality you've brought in, just as much as it was a big deal when they committed, they still have all those options. Jonte Cook could call A&M tomorrow, and they're going to say yes. Derek Williams can call LSU tomorrow, and they'll say yes, son. Stay in state. Malik Muhammad, an elite corner, can absolutely end up somewhere else. Cedric Baxter is from Orlando, Florida. You don't think he can call up the Gators or anyone else, Florida State, where he was once committed? Absolutely. So the wheels can fall off just as impressively as they were put on after that Arch Manning verbal commitment. So it's clearly the program that has the most to gain or lose on the field. And look, Texas also has some kids that are uncommitted that are potentially ahead. I think that's what's interesting about their approach as well. David Hicks, a big-time player in state. We mentioned Damon Wilson has them somehow in his Final Five. He's never been to campus, so maybe he gets out there. Deuce Robinson, number 1 tight ends. It's USC or Texas, it feels like right now. And then Jalen Hale, another big-time receiver in the SI 99 we talked about, coming off the board on the 21st. Texas battling Alabama and Georgia and A&M in that recruitment. So again, head-to-head wins against the programs you're trying to be is a predicator for how you might fare on the field one day.
For me, it's two things have to happen for Texas. This game against Alabama has to look a lot like the 2019 game against LSU, that great LSU team in 2019. Texas didn't win the game, but they played LSU to the wire. The crowd was crazy live that night. You could just hear it watching the television. You're like, wow. Like I would have loved. I've been in that stadium. And when that crowd gets going, it's a cool place to be at, right? Obviously, it didn't end up real well for Notre Dame, but so I know what that crowd is like when things are going well. You could hear it in the 2019 game. I don't even think they have to win. I think they just have to compete with Bama. And then the pitch is, hey, guys, we're closer than people think. We just need you to come here instead of going there to do that. Then they have to follow that up by handling your business at the next 3 games. Handle your business against Texas San Antonio. Handle your business against Texas Tech. Handle your business against West Virginia. Then you've got the Red River rivalry on October 8th. They have been very competitive against Oklahoma in recent years, in spite of the fact that they gave that game away. Yeah. If they can handle their business after Alabama, assuming that game is competitive, if they can handle their business against Oklahoma, then you got Iowa State that next week, who is not as good this year. That could put Texas on a run. And that's why, for me, they're my dark horse playoff contender this year. And look, they've got some holes on their roster, but they've got enough firepower, and the schedule sets up the way it has. Oklahoma State's not going to be quite as good as they were last year. Another game Texas should have won. They get Kansas State on the road. Kansas State's a good football team, but Texas has more talent.
There's more talent, yeah.
Always. Right. They get Baylor at home. Baylor lost a ton of kids in the NFL. So if they can just survive that Bama game and just be competitive, there's not a game left on their schedule. They can't win if they can prove that they know how to win. They should have been, if you talk about just games they led in the fourth quarter last year, what's their record? 9-3?
Yeah.
10-2? So I think Texas has got a chance, but it's going to come down to the Bama game, because I think a competitive loss or a win against Alabama does a lot for that Texas team, like we've seen in the past, whether it was Clemson beating Notre Dame in 2015 that kind of was the final nail in the Clemsoning coffin, right? Was Notre Dame even have it? But then Bama, what was it really that set Clemson off? It was that close loss to Alabama that made people realize, hey, you know what? Clemson's legit. It was Notre Dame taking Georgia down to the wire in 2017 that gave that team a lot of confidence to go out there and just curb stomp everybody they played for the next month and a half. I think that could have the same galvanizing impact for Texas. And if that happens, Texas is going to be really hard to beat for some of those kids. And I would not want to be a team that had a commitment. I would not want to be Texas A&M sitting there with a kid that Texas wanted if that happens, because I think it's going to be hard. I think kids are just waiting on Texas to be good again. Just look, show me you're good again. And, and I think that's going to be the case. But that's why that Bama game, to your point, John, is huge. But the Oklahoma game looms every bit as large, in my opinion.
And this is the year to get them. This is the year. If you're going to get Oklahoma, get over that hump and all that, this is the year to do it. Transition at the top, where it creates more doubt in the Sooners preseason than I have seen like in my whole life. right? We always kind of know what we're getting with OU, and now all of that is on its head. Brent Venables, a defensive guy, brings in Jeff Lebby. That's a high tempo, very fast offense. How easy is that to install year one? The quarterback's familiar with Dylan Gabriel, but who else is? Nobody else. So you're going to rely on youth. You're going to rely on transfers in that regard. So this is the year from a talent perspective where I think Texas clearly has more talent than Oklahoma. And that's not something we've been able to say over the long haul of the last 10, 15 years. So this is also the year to get Oklahoma, and the timing couldn't line up any better for Sarkisian and Texas relative to recruiting and relative to what's ahead and potentially a Big 12 title type season.